Sister gets pregnant, and her boyfriend dumps her, but parents punish me and send me away to another state 10 years later. Karma strikes. Before we begin the story, take a moment to support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support means the world to our channel and helps us spread more shocking, true stories to light. Now, let's get started. So, I'm 24 now, but this whole mess started when I was just 14. Back then, my sister, Sophie, who was 17 at the time, now 27, was the golden child of our family. My parents, dad 45 and mom 43, treated her like she walked on water while I was just there. But things hit a whole new level when Sophie dropped a bombshell at the dinner table. "I'm pregnant," she announced, beaming like she had just won the lottery. I expected an explosion, maybe some yelling, maybe even some grounding. But instead, Mom gasped, jumped up, and threw her arms around Sophie, crying happy tears. She kept repeating, "I'm going to be a young grandma. What a blessing." Meanwhile, Dad just sat there, staring at his plate, chewing slower than usual, but saying nothing. Classic dad move. He never stood up to Mom, no matter what. And me? I sat there, my fork frozen in midair, my mouth hanging open like an idiot. Are you serious? If I'd gotten a girl pregnant at 14, I would have been packed off to military school before the pregnancy test even dried. But Sophie? She got a hug and a congratulations. That moment pretty much summed up my entire childhood. Sophie could do no wrong, while I was constantly held to a different, harsher standard. When I got a C in math last semester, I lost my gaming privileges for a month. When Sophie failed 2 classes the year before, Mom bought her a new phone to cheer her up because she's been under so much stress, sweetheart. I swear, the double standards in my house were enough to make my head explode. The deadbeat boyfriend and the family's denial. Now, let's talk about Ethan, Sophie's absolute gem of a boyfriend. If there were an award for biggest loser, this guy would take the gold. Ethan was 19, constantly unemployed, and somehow managed to get fired from 4 different jobs in the past year. Last Christmas, he actually showed up with a gift for Sophie, still with the security tag on it. We all just awkwardly ignored it, pretending not to notice. But come on, the guy wasn't even trying to hide the fact that he was a mess. Ethan had this beat-up Honda that made our entire street smell like burning oil every time he pulled up. And let's not forget the no regrets neck tattoo. The irony? He should have had a lot of regrets. But somehow my parents just ate up every word out of his mouth like he was some kind of wise philosopher. The first time he came over for dinner, about 3 months before the pregnancy bombshell, I remember him leaning back in his chair, grinning like he owned the place, and saying, "I just don't believe in college, you know? Real entrepreneurs don't need degrees." This coming from a guy who was literally working at a car wash and living in his mom's basement. I glanced at Dad, hoping for something, a smirk, an eye roll, maybe even a well, Ethan actually, but nope, just silence. Mom, on the other hand, nodded along like he was dropping groundbreaking wisdom. I tried to warn them. One night, I overheard Ethan on the phone, pacing in our backyard, talking about how he got kicked out of his previous girlfriend's house for stealing her dad's credit card. That should have been the end of Ethan in our house, right? Nope. When I told Mom, she just gave me this soft, patronizing smile and said, "People deserve second chances. Honey, Ethan's just going through a rough patch. A rough patch that, apparently, lasted his entire life." At some point, I just stopped trying. If they wanted to bury their heads in the sand, fine. But I had a really bad feeling about where this was all headed, realizing I was the disposable child. The thing about growing up as the less favored child is that you start to doubt yourself. For years, I wondered if I was just imagining things. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe if I was more like Sophie, outgoing, popular, the perfect golden child, my parents would treat me the same way. So I tried. I got good grades, kept my room clean, joined clubs I didn't even care about just to impress them. Nothing worked. Sophie could burn the house down, and my parents would probably find a way to blame it on faulty wiring. I remember one night when I was 12 and Sophie was 15. We both had important events scheduled for the same evening, my science fair and her chorus concert. Guess which one my parents chose to attend? Yep. They went to watch Sophie sing one line in a group number while I stood alone next to my weeks-long science project on renewable energy. My teacher kept glancing around, probably wondering where my parents were. Are they stuck in traffic? She finally asked, her voice kind. I forced a smile. Yeah, traffic. They weren't stuck in traffic. They just never came. And the worst part? I won second place. Not that they ever knew. Not that they would have cared, even if they did. But all of that was nothing compared to what happened after Sophie's pregnancy announcement. The family meeting that changed everything. About a week later, Mom called for a family meeting. And let me tell you, in our house, a family meeting usually meant bad news for me. Sophie showed up 20 minutes late, as usual, dramatically sighing about how her back hurt from carrying a human life. Mom immediately jumped up to grab her a special pregnancy pillow. I just sat there, rolling my eyes. Then came a bombshell. With the baby coming, we need to rethink our living arrangements. Mom began, her voice all sweet and gentle. Translation? I was being shipped off to Florida to live with my grandparents, so Sophie could have my room for her nursery. It's only temporary, Mom said quickly, not even looking me in the eye. Sophie needs our support system right now. I turned to Dad, praying he'd say something. He just mumbled, "It'll be good for you to spend time with Grandpa and Grandma. They have that nice pool. A freaking pool that was supposed to make up for the fact that they were exiling me from my own home." And then, this was the cherry on top. Sophie actually had the nerve to say, "You should be grateful. At least you don't have to deal with midnight feedings and diaper smells." Then she laughed. "Plus, I've always wanted your room. It gets better sunlight for the baby." I just sat there, stunned. They were discussing my entire future like I wasn't even in the room. Like I was just a piece of furniture they could relocate when it became inconvenient. When exactly am I supposed to leave? I finally asked, my voice cracking. Mom pulled out her phone, casually checking her calendar. "Well, Grandma and Grandpa said you could come anytime, but we thought maybe after the school year ends. That gives you about 6 weeks to say goodbye to your friends." 6 weeks. That was the generous time frame they were giving me to completely uproot my life. I had lived in this town my entire life. My friends were here. My school. The comic book store where I spent weekends. The park where I was just starting to get good at skateboarding. And they expected me to just leave. Do I get any say in this? I asked, already knowing the answer. Mom gave me that fake sympathy voice she used when she was pretending to care. "Honey, sometimes families have to make tough decisions. This is what's best for everyone. Everyone except me." "Don't be so dramatic," Sophie huffed, rolling her eyes. "It's not like you're being sent to prison. Florida has beaches and stuff." That was the exact moment I realized something that I should have known a long time ago. To them, I was disposable, erased from my own home. After that so-called family meeting, I kept waiting for someone to say, "Just kidding," or at least offer some kind of compromise. But never came. Instead, they went full speed ahead with their plans. Mom and Sophie started shopping for baby stuff like my fate had already been sealed. Meanwhile, I was expected to just deal with it. One afternoon, I came home from school and found all my books shoved into cardboard boxes in the hallway. My bookshelf? Empty. I turned to Mom, heart pounding. "What's going on?" She barely glanced up from her phone. "Oh, we need the shelf for the baby's things. You weren't taking those books to Florida anyway, right? We'll store them in the attic." Stored. Like junk. Like I was junk. Those books were everything to me. I had spent years saving up to buy them. Garage sales, secondhand stores, little notes scribbled in the margins for my past self. Now, they were just being packed away like they meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. Tyler the freeloader takes over. Meanwhile, Ethan started showing up even more, like he had already moved in. One day, I saw him lounging on our couch, wearing my favorite hoodie. My Chicago Bulls hoodie. The one I saved up for. The one that actually meant something to me. "What the hell, dude?" I snapped. Ethan just shrugged, not even looking up from his phone. "Chill, little man. You won't need warm clothes in Florida anyway." I wanted to punch him. But what really got me? Mom was standing right there. Did she say anything? Did she tell him to take it off? No. She just sighed dramatically and said, "Stop making a scene." A scene? I was being kicked out of my own house, and this guy, this deadbeat, was walking around in my clothes, eating our food, treating my home like his. And I was the one being dramatic? That hoodie? Yeah, never got it back. But he sold it or left it in some random parking lot. Being erased, piece by piece. As the weeks passed, Mom and Sophie talked about the baby like I wasn't even there. They'd sit in the living room, chatting excitedly about how they'd rearrange my space. "We can turn his desk into a changing station," Mom mused. "Oh, and we should get rid of his bed to make more room for the crib," Sophie added. They were completely erasing every trace that I had ever lived in that house. I tried talking to my friends about it, but they didn't really get it. Most of them thought moving to Florida sounded cool. "Dude, you'll live right by the beach. Maybe you'll see an alligator." They didn't understand that I wasn't moving. I was being thrown away. The only person who really got it was my best friend, Liam. When I told him what was happening, he just shook his head. "Dude, that's some serious bullshit. They can't just ship you off because your sister got knocked up. That's not your fault." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't crazy. But it didn't change anything. A father who wouldn't fight. I tried to talk to Dad alone one night. He was in the garage, organizing his tools. The one place where he could pretend like he had some control over his life. "Dad, this isn't fair," I said. "Why do I have to leave? Why can't Sophie and Ethan get their own place?" He sighed, running a hand over his face. "Sometimes in families, we have to make sacrifices. But why is it always me?" I pushed. Dad hesitated. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear him, he said, "Well, I think doesn't matter much around here, son. You know that." That look in his eyes, that tired, defeated look, that was the moment I realized something terrifying. If I stayed in this house, if I let them break me down, I'd become him. One last desperate attempt. I made one final attempt to stay. I went to my school's guidance counselor and told her everything. I thought maybe, just maybe, if an adult said something, my parents would reconsider. She looked concerned. She even called my parents in for a meeting. But when Mom showed up, she put on her perfect parent act. She smiled, clasped her hands together, and said in the softest, most reasonable voice, "This is such a wonderful opportunity for him to bond with his grandparents. We're making this sacrifice as a family, you know?" And just like that, the counselor bought it. I walked out of that office with Mom gripping my shoulder so hard it hurt. She leaned down and whispered, "Don't ever try to embarrass this family again." I had never hated her more. The final straw. The night before I left, I overheard Sophie on the phone with a friend. She was laughing. "Yeah, it's perfect. The brat is getting shipped off, so the baby gets a whole nursery. Mom already promised to help with night feedings, so I can still go out sometimes." She sounded so happy, like this was some win for her, like I was just an inconvenience that was finally being removed from her life. I walked out of the house that night and headed to my old tree house, the one Dad and I built when I was 7. It was one of the only good memories I had with him. When I got there, the ladder was gone. The window was smashed. Spray painted across the front were the words. Ethan was here. Inside, beer cans, cigarette butts, trash. That tree house used to be my place, my safe spot. Now, just like everything else in my life, it had been ruined. The last night in my own home. My last night at home, I ate alone. No special dinner. No goodbye party. Sophie and Mom were too busy registering for baby gifts online. Dad sat in front of the TV in silence. I ordered a pizza with my own money and sat on the floor of my empty room because my bed had already been dismantled to make space for the crib. And that was it. That was how my family sent me away. Like I was nothing. Starting over in Florida. So, just like that, I was gone. At 14 years old, I packed up what little I was allowed to take and left behind everything I knew. My hometown, my school, my friends. And for what? So my golden child sister could have my room for her baby. Mom drove me to the airport, dropping me off like I was some distant relative visiting for the summer. "This is for the best, sweetheart," she said, pressing a forced smile onto her face. "Your grandparents are so excited to have you." I didn't say a word. I just grabbed my bag and walked away. She didn't even wait to see if I got through security. By the time I turned around, her car was already gone. A new life, whether I wanted it or not. My grandparents, Margaret, 68, and George, 70, were waiting at the gate when I landed in Florida. They pulled me into a hug immediately. "We're so happy to have you, honey," Grandma said, squeezing me tight. I should have been happy to see them. They were always kind to me growing up. But at that moment, I just felt numb. Nothing in my life was mine anymore. I was just a guest in someone else's home. The first days were the worst. Starting high school as the new kid in a new state where I knew nobody, it sucked. Badly. I had this weird northern accent that apparently stood out. Some kid asked where I was from, and when I told him, he squinted and said, "Wait, you moved here 'cause your pregnant sister needed your room?" When I nodded, he just shook his head. Dude, that's messed up. That was the first time anyone had actually said it out loud. The first time someone validated what I had been feeling all along. That no, I wasn't crazy. That what my family did to me wasn't normal. Breaking down in the kitchen. The first month was brutal. I barely spoke, barely ate, barely slept. I kept to myself at school, eating lunch alone, heading straight home afterward. One afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to do homework, when something inside me just snapped. Tears started falling before I even realized I was crying. Full-on sobbing. Grandma didn't say anything at first. She just sat down next to me, rubbing my back gently, waiting for me to calm down. Then, she said something I'll never forget. What your parents did wasn't right, and you're allowed to be angry about it. But don't let that anger burn up everything good inside you. I didn't say anything back. I just nodded, wiping my face. But those words stuck with me. Grandpa's workshop. Finding something to call my own. Grandpa had this old workshop in the garage where he built furniture. One day, he asked me if I wanted to learn. "Figured you might like working with your hands," he said with a shrug. No pressure. At first, I didn't care. I wasn't in the mood to learn anything. But I didn't have much else to do, so I gave it a shot. And you know what? I was good at it. The first time I built something on my own, a simple wooden box Grandpa put on the mantle. Like it was a freaking trophy. My grandson made this, he told everyone who came over. It was the first time in my life that an adult was proud of something I had done. I pretended to be embarrassed. But secretly, it felt amazing, being forgotten by my own family. Back home, life went on without me. Mom called once a month for awkward small talk. Then she'd spend 20 minutes showing me pictures of Sophie's baby, Olivia, over FaceTime. Dad would get on the phone at the end, muttering, "Be good for your grandparents." Then he'd hang up. Sophie? She never called. Not once. The only time she reached out was 3 months after I moved. I was actually excited when I saw her name pop up on my phone. Maybe she missed me. Maybe she felt bad. Nope. She just wanted me to convince Grandma and Grandpa to send a bigger check for Olivia's christening gift. I hung up on her. My birthday? Just another reminder. For my 15th birthday, my parents sent me a card, 3 days late. Inside, a $25 iTunes gift card and a generic message. Not even a "we miss you." Meanwhile, my grandparents threw me an actual birthday party. They baked a cake, took me shopping to pick out a decent laptop for school. The contrast between how my parents treated me and how my grandparents treated me couldn't have been clearer. Finding my own path. Slowly, I started adapting. I joined the computer club at school. Met a guy named Marcus who lived nearby. He came from a split home, so he kind of understood what it was like to feel stuck between two worlds. And then, I discovered something that would change everything. I was really good with computers. My new laptop became my obsession. I taught myself basic programming, how to fix hardware, even a little graphic design. Grandpa noticed and started bringing home broken electronics from yard sales. Either you fix it, or it was already broken, so no harm done, he'd say with a wink. I loved it. By the time I turned 16, I got a part-time job at Best Buy in their tech department. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something for me. I was creating a future where I wouldn't need my family's approval, where I wouldn't be dependent on people who could just toss me aside when I became inconvenient. I had a plan, and I wasn't looking back. Building my own future. Working at Best Buy was a game changer. Not only was I making my own money, but I was also learning. I got better at tech repairs, troubleshooting hardware issues, and even explaining things to customers. My manager, Rick, took me under his wing. "You got a knack for this, kid," he said once. "Most of the guys here just want to sell warranties, but you actually fix things." For the first time, I felt valuable. By 17, I started doing freelance computer repairs on the side. I'd fix people's laptops for cheap, removing viruses, upgrading hardware, recovering lost files. At 18, I opened a savings account and started putting away every cent I could. Why? Because I had one goal, To never be in a position where my family could just dispose of me again. Returning home as a stranger. I only went back home once before I graduated. Grandma thought it was important for me to spend Thanksgiving with my parents, so I agreed. Biggest mistake ever. The second I walked through the door, I knew I didn't belong there anymore. My old room? Gone. Completely transformed into a pink, unicorn-covered nursery. Not a single sign that I had ever lived there. Sophie was still living at home with Olivia, who is now a toddler. Ethan? Surprise, surprise. He was between jobs again. He spent the whole weekend playing video games while my parents pretended he wasn't a deadbeat. And the worst part? They all acted like nothing had happened. Like I had just been away at summer camp for a few years. Mom kept saying stuff like, "Oh, we should show you the new mall. They renovated it since you lived here." Like I had chosen to leave. Like I wasn't banished from my own home. A hollow apology. Dad pulled me aside one night after dinner. "I should have handled things differently," he admitted. "I'm sorry, son." And for a second, I almost felt something, but it was too late. An apology years after the fact doesn't undo the damage. I couldn't wait to get back to Florida. That trip made me realize something. My grandparents' house felt more like home than my actual childhood home ever did. Graduation and my final goodbye. By the time I turned 18, I had my high school diploma and a plan. I was staying in Florida. I was getting my own place. And I was starting my own business, a small IT consulting company. At my graduation, my parents actually flew down. It was awkward. Mom kept showing off pictures of Olivia to my grandparents' neighbors, going on and on about what an amazing young mother Sophie was. Amazing? This was the same girl who still lived at home, jobless, while my parents raised her kid for her. And somehow, she was still the golden child. Meanwhile, Dad pulled me aside after dinner. "You really don't want to come home?" he asked. "No," I said simply. My old room wasn't my room anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. I was done being treated like an afterthought. Grandpa's final gift. That night, before my parents left, Grandpa pressed a check for $5,000 into my hand. "Seed money for your business," he said with a wink. "Don't tell your grandmother. She thinks we're just helping with rent." I choked up, not because of the money, but because he believed in me. Something my own parents never did. That night, I realized something huge. Family isn't about blood. It's about the people who see your value, who stand by you, and who invest in you, even when they don't have to. By that definition, my grandparents were my real parents. And my biological parents? Just two people I happen to be related to. The business that changed everything. From 1824, I built my company from the ground up. At first, I was just doing basic tech repairs. Upgrading laptops. Fixing broken screens. Removing malware. I rode my bike to clients' houses because I couldn't afford a car. But slowly word spread. Then I got my big break. An accounting firm called me, desperate for help. Their server crashed, and they've been quoted thousands by a big IT company to recover their data. I fixed it in one afternoon for a few $100. They were so impressed, they hired me on retainer. That was my first real business contract. From there, it just snowballed. By 20, I had my first employee. By 22, I had an office space and 3 full-time employees. By 24, I had a team of 5, including an office manager to handle all the stuff I hated dealing with. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, independent. Most importantly, I had built something no one could take away from me. Meanwhile, back at home, while I was building my future, Sophie was still Sophie. By now, Olivia was 10 years old. And Sophie? She was still living at home, still jobless, still making excuses. Retail is too exhausting. The managers are always out to get me. Customers are rude. The reality? She just didn't want to work. And my parents? They were still bankrolling her life. Dad even delayed his retirement because they were still financially supporting her. Meanwhile, Ethan had pulled his classic move, got another girl pregnant, went to jail for a few months, then disappeared again. Olivia was growing up without a real father. And Sophie? She just kept playing the victim. The call that changed everything. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Mom's name popped up. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Her voice was shaky. "It's Sophie," she said. "She was in a car accident." My stomach dropped. "Is she okay?" She broke her leg in 3 places, fractured her hip. She won't be able to work for months. I waited. I knew where this was going. And then, the final blow, and Ethan left for good. He moved to California with some girl he met online. Ah, there it was. They weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because they needed me. Your father's hours got cut. My arthritis is getting worse. We're behind on bills. And Olivia, she needs help. Then the kicker. We were hoping you could come visit. Reconnect. Maybe help out. Translation? The forgotten son was now the only son they could turn to. I sat there, gripping my phone, silent. For the first time in 10 years, they finally needed me. And I wasn't sure how I felt about it. The moment karma came knocking. I sat there for a long time after hanging up, just staring at my phone. 10 years. It had taken them 10 years, a financial crisis, a family disaster, for them to remember I existed. Not because they missed me, not because they regretted what they did, but because they needed something from me. I thought about ignoring them, just cutting them off completely. But then I thought about Olivia. She was innocent in all this. A 10-year-old kid caught in the middle of this disaster. She deserved better than what Sophie was giving her. And if I'm being honest, a small part of me wanted them to see what I had become without them. I wanted them to know that the kid they threw away had built a life they now needed. So I called Mom back and said I'd visit. But I wasn't staying at their house. I booked a hotel. No way in hell was I sleeping on their couch or in what used to be my room, because we all knew that room hadn't been mine in a decade. Walking back into my old life. When I pulled up to my childhood home, it felt foreign, like a house I'd once known, but that had long since stopped being mine. The walls were lined with family photos, but mostly of Olivia. There were only 2 pictures of me. My high school graduation. A dusty old-school portrait from when I was 12. That's it. Sophie was sprawled on the couch, leg in a full cast, scrolling on her phone like she wasn't a financial disaster waiting to happen. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Oh, you actually came." Like she was surprised I had bothered. Mom hovered nervously. Dad pulled me into a hug. And for the first time in years, I saw how much older he looked. Tired, worn down, like a man drowning in the weight of his own choices. And then, Olivia came home from school. Everything changed. Meeting Olivia for the first time. She was bright, curious, none of Sophie's entitlement. At first, she was shy, hiding behind Mom's leg. But when she found out I worked with computers, she lit up. "Wait, you know how to code? Can you teach me?" We spent the next hour talking about games, coding, and books. She asked a million questions. And for the first time that day, I actually felt like I belonged. Not in this house, not with my parents, but with her. She was the only person in this house worth knowing. And that's when I knew I wasn't here for Sophie. I wasn't here for my parents. I was here for Olivia, the real reason they wanted me back. That night, after Olivia went to bed, the conversation finally turned to why I was really there. Mom looked uncomfortable as she started talking. "We're drowning in medical bills. Sophie can't work for at least 6 months. Ethan is gone, and we're behind on the mortgage and Olivia's tuition." And then, the final plea. "You're doing so well with your business, we were hoping you could help out." Sophie finally looked up from her phone, smirking. Yeah, bro must be nice having all that freedom and money. Like she wasn't the reason I had been thrown away in the first place. Like I had just lucked out, instead of fighting for every inch of the life I built. I leaned back, arms crossed. "So let me get this straight. You sent me away when I was 14. Didn't call. Didn't visit. Didn't care. But now that Sophie's broke, Ethan's gone, and Dad's struggling to keep up with the bills suddenly, I'm family again?" Mom opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "I'll help." Her eyes lit up. "But," Sophie scowled. "Oh, here we go. I'm not giving you a blank check." Mom's smile faded. "I'll cover Olivia's basic expenses. School fees. Medical bills. But I pay the providers directly. Not you." Sophie flipped out. "Oh, so you don't trust me?" "No," I said flatly. "I don't." Mom looked offended, but Dad? Dad just nodded, because he knew I was right. "That's fair," he said quietly. "You have no reason to trust us." And that's when I laid out my final condition. "Sophie, once your leg heals, you're getting a job." She exploded. "Are you serious? You're going to put conditions on helping your own family?" "I'm helping Olivia, not you." She stormed off, slamming her bedroom door. But Dad surprised me. I think that's reasonable, he said. And for the first time, I saw it. The tiny spark of a man who had once wanted to stand up for himself, but never did. A final conversation with my father. As I walked out of my car, Dad followed. For a long moment, he just stood there, hands shoved in his pockets. I should have stood up for you back then, he admitted. It was easier to go along with your mother and Sophie. But I regret it. Every day, I let his words sit between us. I wasn't ready to forgive him. But for the first time, I believed he was genuinely sorry. Take care of Olivia, I said. She deserves better than this mess. He nodded, and I drove away, knowing that I was finally free. The aftermath, where we are now, it's been a few months since that visit. Yes, I'm still helping with Olivia's expenses, but only through Dad and only for her. Sophie? She's still not working. She's been looking into online classes for 6 months now. Translation? She's still waiting for a way to avoid responsibility. Mom still makes excuses for her. Dad still seems tired. The good news? Olivia and I talk every week. We video chat. We talk about books, coding life. She's smart. Smarter than Sophie ever was. And I'm going to make sure she never feels as alone as I did. Why didn't cut them off completely? A lot of people ask, why didn't you just cut them all off? And trust me, I thought about it. But Olivia is innocent in all of this. She didn't ask to be born into this mess. And if I can make her life better, even just a little, then it's worth it. But my parents, my sister, they need me now, and I'll help, but on my terms. Because the boy they threw away, he built a life so good. Now, they have to come to him. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more real-life family dramas. Let me know in the comments what you think about today's story. Was it fair or totally messed up? See you in the next one.